In normal English word construction, the use of the prefix trans, according to the Latin, originally simply means beyond, as in transatlantic or lying beyond the Atlantic, or transcendent, as in transcendent worth, lying beyond the typical worth. But when trans is connected to the morally established and scientifically fixed reality of defined gender, as in transgender, or transgenderism, as in our truth-impaled, lawless, corrupted, and immoral society, well, the drive to force the acceptance of two mutually exclusive words, such as trans and gender, is producing conflict of all types. In describing such an effort, it's insufficient to just use the word woke to describe the general cultural attitude behind the drive to force the concept of transgender as an equal or positive development within the arenas of defined moral, scientific, medical, spiritual, psychological, or physiological standards and norms. Yet we see our nation being literally split apart by a small but vocal political and ideological contingent. And when promoted by government at the highest level, such as our own State Department, our departments of justice, education, and defense, and even directly from the White House and our nation's president, who boldly promotes transgender and drag rallies, cultural division is being driven deeper, forcing people to either understand and defend what is morally and scientifically true, or to accept as normal the conflicting combining of the two good terms, trans and gender. The personal, family, and cultural impacts on society, particularly children who, through the actions of adults who change laws to permit minors to receive permanently altering hormonal or radical surgery, those kind of changes, to change their biological and chromosomal birth sex from male to female or female to male, are profound and mostly irreversible. Yet the tortured justifications to allow for such profound changes to occur, which ignore true science, biblical morality certainly, and psychological realities, has reached historic levels. The denial of reality and scientific truth and upending generations of civil laws put into place to protect the innocent is resulting in nothing less than the abuse of the vulnerable, our children, their families, and our cultures as a whole. And all of these laws, once deliberately put in place to protect, are being rewritten to harm and violate the vulnerable. It's sad. Yet despite the obvious and perhaps not so obvious permanent impacts, most in positions of authority, led by those in civil government who make and enforce the laws, enabled by an horrendous number of religious leaders who literally apologize for unlawful and selfish adult behavior and the legalized abuse, literally, of children, thus creating permanent harm beyond description. It's being waged right now on our children and families. To me, it's reminiscent of the laboratories of the Third Reich. It's serious. So beginning today, and extending into next week's program, Isaac and I are going to engage this subject with a special guest who's very qualified to speak on this issue. He's an author, the son of a pastor, and someone who's experienced more than most people can imagine. But by the love and the mercy of God, he now speaks truth in love to this issue. He's also the author of the book, From Queer to Christ, My Journey into the Light. His name is George Carneal. The title I've chosen for today's program and next is Transgenderism Exposed, Biblically, Truthfully, and Lovingly. And with that, I welcome in right now, back to the program, George Carneal. George, thank you for being back with Isaac and I. You were with us several years ago, but it's great to have you back.
And it's good to be back. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. Well, George, when you were with us before, you shared a bit of your powerful journey, your personal life experience, your spiritual life experience, and why it brings you to the point where you have now such passion and knowledge to speak on this issue that we're going to undertake today and next week. You can't go into all of your history and your testimony, but can you share a little bit to establish for listeners who probably don't remember you, or just lay out some of this for the next minute or two, if you don't mind?
Yes, I am the son of a Baptist minister, and I spent 25 years in that lifestyle. And in my book, I just share what it's like to struggle with your faith and a same-sex attraction. And I really wanted to give Christians some insight into the reality of what that world is really like versus the sanitized version of what you are getting from Hollywood and the media. Additionally, because I have so many individuals and friends that I know in that lifestyle who have gone down the transgender path, and I've seen what it has done to their lives. It has devastated their lives. I'm very passionate about this issue because I want people to wake up and to realize that the narrative that is being fed by the media is not the truth. People really are not being told the truth. And sadly, so many of these transgender individuals are going down this path and are having to suffer the long-term repercussions of having bought the lie that they could change their gender. So I just want to bring some light to this subject.
And George, that was superb. Just share just one little piece on this. Your departure into the lifestyle when you were young, the Lord did bring you back. And you've talked about your father in the past. Could you share just a little bit about how that relationship has meant so much in your journey?
The media often pushes the father-daughter, mother-son narrative, but I need people to understand it's the same-sex bonding with the parent that is so imperative to keep so many of these young men and women who go into that lifestyle. It's because there's a brokenness, usually with the same-sex parent. It could be the opposite-sex parent for other reasons, and I detail this stuff in my book. But with my father, because there was a disconnect with him, and he wasn't overly demonstrative in his love, but additionally, the rejection from my male peers at school just left me completely deficient with any real form of male bonding, which is why when I went into a gay bar at 18, I became so addicted to that life, because I was trying to find something to fill that void that I didn't realize that only Jesus could fill. I thought I could fill that void through men, and eventually God helped me to see that I could only get it through Jesus.
Amen. Thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back to continue as we get into talking about definitions of important terms. You don't want to miss this. And George is going to come back in the next segment and actually describe in rather significant detail exactly what happens when a person begins to undergo or hormonal or actual surgical change.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment, or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap as we talk today, our program, part one of Transgenderism Exposed, Biblically, Truthfully, Lovingly. We have a return guest with us, George Carneal. And George, as we talk about transgenderism, I'm thinking back to about 15, 16 years ago. I was working in social work and things before I got into teaching in the public schools. And this was long before people would introduce themselves with their pronouns and get upset if you misgendered them. But I remember working with some troubled youth who were going through gender dysphoria and things. I remember working with some middle-aged men who were transvestites, and they would dress in women's clothes even though they were heterosexual men. And I found the whole thing very confusing. And I think now, fast forward, it's becoming more mainstream and people are talking about it, but I think many of us still get confused by what we're actually talking about. So before we go into any more of this, would you mind just maybe giving us some definitions of some of the things we need to know if we're going to talk biblically about transgenderism?
Okay, well, transgender is actually someone whose sexual identity or gender identity doesn't match the sex that they were assigned at birth. Transgenderism is really more of a person who's going to start living out being transgender, even if they don't go through the actual cross-sex surgery. Transsexual is actually someone who actually goes through the surgery and lives their life as a trans individual. Like you said, transvestite is usually men, and usually done in private, men who like to experiment and cross-dress in women's clothing, and some women can do it as well in terms of dressing like men. And then drag queen, of course, you'll hear, it's usually just gay men who dress kind of over the top as women, and it's merely just to entertain the crowd. So I hope that will give a little clarification about those words when they hear them and what they mean.
I think that's really helpful, and because we hear about drag queens and this and that, and sometimes people think that's transgender, but it's not. It's helpful to understand the gender, the confusion that's going on for many of these folks.
Yeah.
George,
drag queens are just gay men who.
Okay, George, I will ask you just very quickly to do what we did on the radio before, because I think it's so important on these definitions. Just quickly give a restatement of the definitions of these key terms that you just gave.
Okay, so transgender is someone whose their gender identity doesn't match, or they feel it doesn't match the sex that they were assigned at birth. A transsexual is someone who's actually living transgender because they've gone through the cross-sex surgery. Transvestite is typically men, and usually done in private, where they experiment cross-dressing into women's clothing, but they are very heterosexual. And then drag queens are usually very straight up just gay men who love just dressing as women, but very over the top in their appearance to merely entertain and perform before adult crowds in the gay community.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's go move into this now. Defining the terms we'd like to do, that's important. Let's move now into describing the problem. Give description. All right, now if someone undergoes transgender, moving into that change, hormonal, surgical, for most people, they have no idea what that means. Lay out as detailed as you feel appropriate, George. Okay. What it is, so that our audience, who probably in most cases, again, have no idea really, understand what's actually taking place and why this is so serious.
I want the audience to know they are unable to change their gender. It's nothing but plastic surgery, and these men and women who are going through it are nothing but guinea pigs. And understand, I have heard that the estimate is that for every trans individual that the medical community can get on that path, it's about $2 million each for the pharmaceutical company, because what they've done is they've now created lifelong patients. So if the male or female decides to take the cross-sex hormones, they have already started to increase the risk of strokes, heart attacks, and blood clots. For the women, once they have once they get on the testosterone, they have to have their ovaries removed, because I believe it increases the risk of ovarian cancer. Then, of course, they have their breast removed. And what the women aren't being told is the hundreds of thousands of dollars that it costs to do these surgeries, because there are multiple surgeries. Once they get ready to fashion the fake male genitalia, they literally have to shave the skin off of your arm. It looks like a chicken bone that has been cleaned, where you will literally just see the woman's bone. And they take the skin and they have to fashion this fake male genitalia. Then they have to have another surgery to have the pump put in. And there's no guarantee that they will ever even be able to urinate through that, because there could also be a risk to or damage to the urinary tract. In addition to that, they have to use a pump to get an erection. I don't even know how it will work in terms of the orgasm, but I have heard women state that when they have orgasms, and even the men as well, they've talked about the pain of not only the orgasm, but it has lasted for hours or even days, to the point of where they no longer want to have sex. For the men, when you have the male genitalia removed, the body sees the female genitalia, as an open wound, and now it's going to try to close it. And this is the danger for the men, because they have to use a device to dilate several times a day for an extended period of time, for a long period of time, to keep that open, because the body's trying to close it. Many of them have complained not only the pain of trying to keep that dilated, the frustration and the time that it takes to do it, but some of them have complained of getting I can't think of the word. It's scar tissue. And they've had to go through the surgery again to have that scar tissue removed and to open this female genitalia back up. And some of them have complained that because of the bacteria that gets built up, that there's a stench that comes from it, because a woman is self-cleaning. So these men who have gone through this have complained. And it's horrific, because their partners don't want to have anything to do with them because the smell is so bad. And I'm not trying to be graphic, but this is what people need to know. Additionally, there's always still the risk of damage to the urinary tract. Mm-hmm. Some of them may have to move to having a colostomy bag. Just internal damage to the organ, or damage to the internal organs through the process of this surgery. There are including the guys who have complained of course, the pain from the sex and the orgasm, and just the regret, because this is not like a tattoo that you get that you hate. Once you remove these body parts, that's it, and they are stuck and having to live with this. So the transgender individuals who are detransitioning and who are warning and sounding the alarm are angry. They are saying we should not have been fast-tracked through the cross-sex hormones or even the cross-sex surgeries. We should have been given counseling. I actually know one guy who was on estrogen. It literally bent him over like an old woman. He went into early osteoporosis and his teeth were falling out. And it will age you. This is what they're not telling people. So I want to say to Christians and to the public in general, this is destroying lives, and it's all just plastic surgery. And these individuals who are going through this not only still have the additional same problems that they had, but they have an additional onslaught of these other problems now because of the surgery and the effects of taking these very dangerous cross-sex hormones and injecting this stuff into their body. Some of them have been on it for so long that they can no longer get off of it. That's how dangerous it is. So I hope that's a little overview of what you are supporting if you support this agenda.
George, I've got to ask you this question. And this wasn't in the script. This is not what we're talking about, but it came up. It's in my mind as you're talking here now. And that is, what causes otherwise responsible adults, be they doctors, physicians, workers in pharmaceutical companies, politicians, pastors, whoever, who are either promoting or not opposing what you described, which I find just, my heart breaks when I hear that. Why are they permitting and encouraging young people to go down this road and experience even a remote portion of what you're describing is horrendous? Why? Why is that happening?
Well, for some, the doctors don't care. They're getting paid. So while these lives are destroyed, they're going home to their beach houses and their mansions and their Porsches. They could care less. They're getting rich off of this. There are some medical professionals who are speaking out, and they've paid a price for speaking out. There are some medical professionals who know the truth but don't want to speak out because they are afraid of the backlash that comes with it. And that goes for the counselors as well. Yes, you have some who don't care, and I've heard the stories where if a trans individual walks in, they will merely after one session say, yes, you're transgender. They will give them whatever paperwork is necessary to start fast tracking them through the cross-sex hormones and then the cross-sex surgeries. But there are some counselors who are in fear of being seen as transphobic for merely just trying to help these individuals see that you can't change your gender, but let's work through the gender dysphoria. Let's find out why it is that you want to change your body to match your mind instead of us trying to get your mind to match your body. And let's work through these. And that's why it is so critical for mental health counseling. I want to say to Christians, there is a remnant of these trans individuals who have been through some severe trauma. And if we get to those root core issues, they really need our prayers and our empathy and our compassion. But sadly, there's a large portion of this so-called trans community who's just jumping on the bandwagon. Because if the girl is a little bit tomboyish in her teen years, or if the boy is a little bit effeminate in his teen years, and someone merely suggests, well, you're a girl, you're supposed to be a boy, and boy, you're supposed to be a girl, they believe it. How can a child process this? Even when I was a teenager, I would dress up in my mom's clothes and put on her high heel shoes, and I wanted to be a girl. And I knew of another woman who was very tomboyish and loved doing boy things. But now that we are adults, she very much loves dressing as a woman and being a woman. And I love being a man. And the studies are that about 80% of the people who struggle with just gender dysphoria, if we will be patient as they get through their puberty, most of them will transition out of that and they will no longer have those feelings. That's why it is so imperative that people wait till they're at least 25 years old, till their minds are fully developed. They've had a time to get through their teen years, all of the hormone craziness that's going on, and to really get counseling and listen to the stories of the individuals who've gone down that path, to be more armed before going down this road and making a decision that is life altering, and you can't change it once it's done.
And you couldn't have said that better. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back for the closing of the program today.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information. Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
George, the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans 1 that he is not ashamed of the good news of Christ, and that it is the power of God to save us from everything. Why is it important for us as Christians to talk about these things, to expose what's going on with the transgender lifestyle that's going on? We have only about 90 seconds left, but what would you encourage us with?
We must speak the truth of God's word in love to these individuals, but also remind them that God does not make mistakes when assigning our gender. God does not make mistakes at all. And for anyone who supports this, it's important to understand that what you are basically doing is saying to God, you made a mistake and we're going to correct it. We must absolutely stand up against this agenda, but have such compassion for these individuals and tell them the truth of God's word in love, but also give them the warnings and sound the alarm about what it's really like for those individuals who've already gone down this path. To just merely get them to see, make an informed decision. Really think about what you're doing before you go down this path, and try to arm yourself with information. We must speak the truth to them. Even if they don't talk to us again, at least your conscience is clear of being able to say, I told you.
George, thank you so much for what you have said today. Very clear, passion. You love the Lord. Thank you so much. And we look forward to you being back with us next week. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to join us next week. This is only an introduction. Part 2 will be next week. And when we cover with George, he'll be back with us again. And we're going to get into the causes. How have we actually gotten to here as a culture Where once we used to protect our children, we now legally abuse them. Where once we rely on truth to inform people, we now withhold information from them. And then we'll get into solutions. Parents, what can you say to your children, your grandchildren? Pastors, what should you say? We'll deal with all of that in next week's program. So thank you for being with us today. And if you've not watched us before, you've not communicated to us, it really would be helpful for Isaac and I and our team to be able to know that you are watching, what God is doing for you through this program. And when you do, let us know where you are watching us on this program. All of that helpful. And pray for us next week and do everything you can to pass along this program to your friends, and make sure you join us again next week for part 2.